Hey guys, what's up? Craig from Bass Lessons Melbourne here. It's been a long time between drinks, as they say. I think the last episode I posted was just December 24th, just before Christmas. A lot's happened since then. I moved house, which is always a time-consuming, stressful process. And obviously everything COVID related in between. And this interview with Steve Jenkins was actually recorded nearly a year ago, so last August 2020, which was the kind of run up to the presidential election. It was also, I think, pretty close to the Black Lives Matter movement that was happening, and obviously middle of the COVID pandemic over there, and it's sat on my hard drive for a long time, and I can't really say why. One reason is that I just kind of lost motivation for doing these. Just being honest, like it's not the same doing things virtually via Zoom. Not to take anything away from Steve, we had a great hang. It was a really great chat. But you know, there's something about that face-to-face interaction and actually hanging out with somebody in real life that, I don't know, spurs me on a little bit more. But we're here. I'm really glad to finally get this episode out there because Steve is a phenomenal bass player. If you've never heard him, definitely go on YouTube and look him up. He's also on some Scott's Bass Lessons things. He's got his own True Fire courses. He's got an amazing band, Steve Jenkins and the Coaxial Flutter, which I'm not sure if that's still happening or not, but he's released some amazing albums under that moniker. So yeah, my apologies for not putting these out, but you know, you can get your money back if you want. Before we go on, I should say thanks to FBass, who are still generously sponsoring this podcast, who've been handcrafting guitars and basses for over 40 years, creating vintage and contemporary designs. So if you're in the market for a new instrument, I highly recommend going and checking out FBass over at www.fbass.com. Shout out to Marcel and George. The music you're hearing at the moment is a track called Sleep is Useless from my band Pickpocket's latest album called Refraction, which you can find on Bandcamp, Spotify and whatever. But back to talking about Steve. Yeah, we touched on a lot of things. We touched on a little bit of politics, a little bit of his journey as a player, tone. We just kind of, the interview actually just kind of kicks in. We were just chatting and I pressed record, and so yeah, the interview doesn't really have a proper introduction, so to speak, but here it is. It's a long one. It's just over 2 hours. The audio quality isn't great, another thing about the online thing, but hopefully you can get enough from it that it's still enjoyable. So I'd love to say a big thanks to Steve for agreeing to chat with me. I really respect him, his playing, his ethos. So I hope you get something from it. And in the meantime, stay safe. Leave a review. Share this podcast around. Let me know what you think. You can send me an email, info@basslessonsmelbourne.com, and I'll see you guys next time. Here's Steve Jenkins.
Like, I gotta get a mic and like a boom arm because, you know, we're evolving, right? So
yeah,
so like that's something I'm sort of researching now, just because, like, you know, I see it being a more useful thing. But pre-pandemic, you know, like this was as much as I was doing, so
yeah,
it actually works really well as there's like a built-in mic that sounds pretty good. So
yeah, it does. Yeah. Are you running Mac?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, the RPG stuff's pretty good as far as I know.
Yeah, I just got a new interface, but I haven't set everything up yet. So I made the move to Universal Audio.
Right.
But yeah, no, man, I've been using this one for like a few years, so it's been great. You know,
you just plug bass straight in.
Sometimes I'll use a preamp beforehand. You know, so I have like there's a thing that Kerry Nordstrand built called the Starlifter, and that thing's really good. I really like that. Then there's like the Tone Hammer, which I've had for years. That's a really good thing.
Have you ever used Noble?
Not yet. I want to check it out. I know all the cool kids use the Noble, but I also know people that don't. I think I'd like to just try one and see what it does for what I'm into doing. But I think for most people who play bass, like even if your style is different or you like a variety of tones, like there's a fundamental thing people like to hear in their sound. And so I think that's probably why people like the Noble, because from what I've heard, that's the thing. Like it's, you know what I mean? Like there's a universal approach to tone that I think that's what people are responding to. So,
sure, unless you're Bunny Burnell.
yeah, I don't really know. Yeah, I don't know. But I think even for that style, you know, like having like some of that up front, I mean, it can only help, you know. I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there. You know, it's hard to I don't have, you know, like I have my thing pretty dialed in, but now that I've got this new ecosystem of stuff with these UAD plugins and stuff like that, I mean, I don't know. It's like I've always been really interested in production, and I think because of home studio stuff being more it's gotten more accessible over the years. Like, you know, I've had a setup for almost 20 years, you know, and I think now that it's just such a commonplace thing, I think, you know, it's just something that is a natural evolution for a lot of us as bass players, and being in a world now, or which we've been in, you know, for a long time, where you can do a lot of stuff from home, you know, like for people that are making albums that aren't nearby, you know, like I love doing that kind of stuff.
And, you know, like I always end up saying, it's only bass.
Right. Yeah, no, like my friend, I don't know if you know this bass player, Matt Rubano. He's like one of my best friends, and he was in this band called Taking Back Sunday. But Matt's a really versatile bass player. Like he played on Lauryn Hill's record and stuff. But like he was talking to somebody about like why he chose bass, and Matt's a real consummate bass player. So the person said, it's like you took the easiest instrument and made it the hardest thing ever. And I feel like sometimes that's the weird pursuit, you know. You know,
well, it's like, you know, bass is one of those things that we spend so much time when we're practicing or whatever at home. Like we spend so much time hearing it in isolation when it's kind of designed to be heard in context. So we make a lot of choices in terms of maybe what we're playing and tonal choices based on that isolation, and then you start to record, or you go and rehearse with your band, and you're like, this isn't quite happening.
Right. Yeah, it's weird. I think a lot of us, I know for me, a lot of my tonal ideas were informed from being a live musician, you know? So there was a phase where I was playing, like my main bass was a modulus for a while, you know, and those are really clear instruments. But if you're playing in a room that's not really the most bass guitar friendly room, like I don't mean in terms of the frequency bass, but you know, like something will get lost between where the band is set up and where the very back of the room is. Like, you know, your notes don't have the definition that they sound like they have when you're on stage. The modulus is like a very, it's a very extreme reaction to that kind of thing, you know, and it speaks in a way that's very clear. But when you take that out of that context and you put it in an isolated recording thing, it's like, oh wait, there's all this stuff now that like I don't hear when I'm playing live. But
yeah, it's like a laser beam for live, but you don't necessarily want that in the studio. Or I
think there's a happy medium with that stuff. Like I really like I don't know, man. Like I like brighter sounds, and I think you can make a case for it depending on like what you're going to do. If you're going to put overdrive on the sound, if you're going to put distortion on it, and it sort of uses that to help the overtones speak a little bit more. But yeah, I think there's some things like that definitely. I think some of those things make recordings easier to manage, because if you have something that has like a lot of stuff, you can easily cut all that in the production process.
Yeah, exactly. If it's not, if you have your tone rolled all the way off, you can't really add it afterwards. But you can kind of replicate it in the mix.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like when you hear some of those isolated bass track recordings. Mm-hmm. One that kind of springs to mind is some of the bass tracks for like Rush.
Yeah.
When you hear that bass, you're like, it just sounds so bizarre. Like it's not really a natural choice you'd maybe make. But then when you hear it in the context of everything else, it's just been sculpted to perfectly fill that spectrum.
Yeah. I love his sound, and I think that's where I started to understand that like having levels of overdrive and compression, even if you don't really notice the overdrive to the point when you're listening to it, there's like so many other sounds that are kind of going along with the bass guitar sound. So like on a song like Tom Sawyer, you've got like the Moog Taurus pedals, right? Like you've got that giant droning E, and then, the bass guitar doesn't sound very saturated next to that. But when you take it out of the mix and you just listen, it's like, wow, there's some stuff happening with his sound that definitely works. But yeah. I don't know. I feel like we're in the golden age of distortion for bass,
I mean, yeah, Dark Glass kind of happened.
Yeah. Like I just did a couple recordings where I used my Dark Glass stuff, and it really, even in a subtle way, it just really added the right amount of everything. It's that what do you call it, man? The kind of distortion is it? Sorry, man. It's like the end of the day.
Like the harmonic distortion?
Harmonic distortion, multi-band distortion, where, you're taking certain frequencies and you're distorting those, but it's keeping the low in there,
Right.
Yeah, it's such a cool sound,
Is that the microtubes, or the B7K?
Yeah, I have the X7, and then I have the B3K. Doug actually gave that to me at a NAMM show, like in 2015. He just handed it to me. He's like, "Here, man, this is for you." I'm like, "Oh shit." Cool. And it's one of the older. It's kind of old now. Like they kind of change their designs every couple of years, or they'll just kind of subtly do a refresh. So this one has like slightly different. It's not as like sci-fi looking. The logo's a little bit more homegrown, but it's I still use that pedal to this day. I love how simple it is.
Yeah, it seems like every other month there's like a new variation of the Dark Glass pedal.
Yeah. I mean, in their plugin, the stuff they do with plugins, like the Parallax, the thing they do with Neural DSP, and then even the stuff they do they had like versions of the B7K, and then like the microtubes before Parallax came out. That's really good. And I don't really have a deal with them, so I'm just like, I bought my X7 before I went out on the road, and so I'd love to work with them, but no, it's like an unsponsored opinion. Like their stuff's like, except for that one pedal that Doug gave me, like everything else.
Yeah, right.
It's quite good.
A friend of mine, Pat Farrell, bass player down here in Brisbane, he just got his hands on one of the Tonehammer preamps, and that has an overdrive circuit in it as well. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he's pretty excited about that sound.
Yeah, that's a really good pedal preamp thing. Like they had an amp for a while called the AG500, and I think that saturation circuit was based on that.
Right.
But the thing that I didn't personally like about the AG500, and I've been with those guys since 2005, like that's the amp company I use. they didn't have a real, like the AG 500 didn't have a really strong mid thing happening, and I feel like the tone hammer pedal kind of fixed that. And so when they started to make the tone hammer amps, that's why I kind of went that direction. Like I dug the AG 500, but I liked the tone hammer sound more because they dealt more with the low mids and stuff like that.
Yeah, I used to have the AG 500 SC, so just a single channel without the...
Okay. Yeah, I had the one with the distortion. Yeah. And it was cool. It was good. That was my one gripe. It's like, I can't get this. I can't get that. Like, it's very clear. There's not enough grit to it.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I've kind of noticed about a lot of your, like what you were saying, like your sound is generally colored, I would say. Would that be a fair call? Yeah,
I would say to a certain extent, it definitely is. At the very least now, like with the stuff that I record, I mean, I'll put a little bit of compression in there. And so that helps with certain things, but like, if there's any overdrive or anything, like that's a big part of it. I don't know. I mean, like some of the stuff is pretty clean too. It's just, I tend to, I used to be a little bit more into rolling the tone further off, but now I kind of put it in the center. And I found that like if I'm playing against something, that seems to be the right amount. I don't know, because like you use more like Fender style basses too, right? Like I know you got like an F bass and stuff like that, but like that kind of sensibility where you're not using more preamp than you need to. It's like you're almost. I try to approach it from making it sound good before there's any real use of preamp. I think for me, the pickups by themselves as passive pickups, they have to sound really good to my ears that way. And then it's easier to put in like overdrive, distortion. Sometimes I'll get clever with some of like the stuff I've posted on Instagram, for example. Like sometimes I'll double tracks because
gotcha.
I'm mixing for someone who's waiting in line looking at their phone. So like that's the thing. Like I wouldn't mix like if I was making a record, which I'm sort of working on a new one now, but like if I was mixing for a record, it wouldn't be the same as like, oh, this is going to be on Instagram. So
that's such an interesting, situation that we're in where those are some of the artistic choices that we need to make, like, will this sound good on an iPhone speaker?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. It's amazing. I think it's taken people a long time to come around to that, but I also think it's like, well, here we are, like I think I started to take social media really seriously. Maybe not as seriously as some people, because some people really jumped in and kind of built their business around their social media. For me, like, I think I was doing a lot of live stuff, so it didn't really occur to me to spend a disproportionate amount of time on social media. Like it was more like, okay, well, I'm playing gigs and I'm meeting people and I'm out in the world, so that's helping my cause. But in the current state of the world that we're in, and even before this, I was getting a decent number of calls for studio sessions. I got gigs from social media, and like it sort of drives, for lack of a better term, it drives my business, man. So it's like, I think just trying to figure out like how to keep your posts sounding a certain way or whatever, it is a weird consideration. And it's also that's not really how anyone would mix a record,
Yeah.
But if you're trying to get someone's attention and just what's it sound like if they're just going to have their phone on the table and they're watching it, then I think it's okay.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I've found is that I actually need to roll off quite a lot of bottom end when I'm recording for Instagram, because the iPhone speaker just craps out. It's just gets
Right.
audio. So you can actually, you don't really need anything below like 100 hertz.
Yeah.
To come through, and then you can get it louder, which is always important.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's a weird thing, man. I would imagine there's probably like presets that people can like kind of see what it would sound like on the phone, but I always test it just to hear what it's going to actually sound like, because even if not just for like the bass, like there's stuff I program a lot of the drums that I end up playing along with. So sometimes I want certain things to be a little bit more audible. But yeah, no, it's all a weird consideration, you know? And I definitely think a lot of the stuff that I like to hear from bass, like if, you know, cause like I play a lot of 5-string bass. So, I mean, I play a decent amount of 4, but if I'm playing 5 and I'm playing some low B stuff, like you're not going to hear that if your phone is just, you have to put on headphones and then you can hear it. But I think just because of the way it moves air and the size of those speakers, like you're not really going to hear it unless you have headphones on.
Just got to wind that tone control open so you can hear the clickety clack of that low sharp.
Yeah, I don't know that social media was intended to be an audiophile experience, but I still think it matters, because I've noticed, like, I would record stuff on my phone, and I don't know. I mean, the other thing that it's gotten me to do though is like I realized, wow, I need to like shed some technique, because I'm a little bit sloppy. Like the room can hide some stuff. So, you know, I mean, I always practice and work on some maintenance things, but I remember I heard myself, like I recorded something into my, into Logic, and I was like, that's like not as clean as it sounds in the room, you know? So
interesting.
Yeah.
I think, you know, like the whole social media thing is like, if you're gonna do it, you may as well do it right.
Right.
You know, because if you half-ass it, you know, you run the risk of damaging your reputation to some extent.
Yeah.
You know, and the bar is so high. Like people, the production value of a lot of stuff out there is so high. So, and people are really used to super high quality production for free, like as disposable, you know, entertainment. It's like, you know, the amount of effort that can go into a 1-minute post can be crazy. Right.
I think the audio is the one place people aren't as forgiving. Like, I don't think anybody's expecting like a J.J. Abrams style like film with lens flares and stuff, but I think audio is the one time people can really. That's not that hard to do, man. Especially for like a minute, you know. It's like, I mean, I think I say that now as like sort of having gone through some examples where I've worked on things and learned how to be more economical with the way I do it.
How do you? I mean, that's one thing that maybe a lot of people, especially, you know, I've been doing a bunch of like ISO jam videos and stuff, and people was like, how do you record for, you know, like, so what's your setup or progress for recording an Instagram clip?
Okay, so one thing that I got in the beginning of the pandemic was I bought one of those iRig streams. And what that is it's a device that IK Multimedia makes. And what it lets you do is you can route audio from, so I can pull up Logic and I can play along. There's like pretty much all the videos I do that sound pretty good. Like if I haven't, like, well, I'll talk about the second method after this, but essentially what this does is like I'll plug my bass into Logic. If I'm playing with anything like a track or something, that's in there too. So literally all it's doing is I'm running the audio from my interface into the iRig stream. Then the iRig stream is plugged into my phone, which is an iPhone. Then I just open the camera app and put it on video, and I would set up that camera to film however I would want to film, you know?
So the iRig Pro, it's like got two connections, one for your laptop and one for your phone.
Yeah, let me see if I can grab it. 1 second.
Yep.
Okay. So it's this device. You run the RCA cables. It's like the device runs into here via RCA cables. And then there's a cable that we have in front of me. You plug this into the iRig, and then this is a lightning cable.
Gotcha. So you're taking like one of the outputs of your interface, your computer interface, the actual audio output of that into the iRig. Gotcha.
Yeah. And so if I wanted to and I could it's basically you're employing the camera, but you're using the audio from the external source.
Yep.
So if I wanted to, if I wanted to stream, if I wanted to play live, I could do it that way,
Yeah. Yeah.
But the way I ended up doing it was I just use it to make better sounding videos. And it saves me the step of having to sync audio and video.
Absolutely.
That's the second way I work on it. So if I want to do something that's longer than a minute, or even if it's a minute, and I want it to just be, I want it to maybe be different or have different shots. I use Final Cut, and I'll use the audio.
That's a learning curve right there. Final Cut Pro.
Yeah. Yep. So then what happens is, you just, the real trick that people have to remember with all that is so let's say I got my phone, and let's say a second camera. And then there's another thing you can do, which I don't feel very critical of this, but it's just for production value. You can always mime your stuff if you need an extra angle. No one's really going to be that mad. But essentially the thing is the audio is coming from the DAW. So you record it, and if you're capturing video as you record it, you just make sure that you can sync the audio. So you clap. I do that thing where you clap, and that way when you can see all the audio files from the camera, you can basically line them up with the transient. There's automatic ways to do it in Final Cut, but at least just to see what it looks like. And then depending on what, if I leave my monitors on and I want to listen to what I'm doing, if I don't want to do it through headphones, sometimes I'll mix a little bit of that into the direct audio, just so it has some stuff. But it's not inherently that complicated. It feels silly to put that kind of production into a minute long thing, but I think sometimes it pays off, man. Or sometimes it's cool to do. I did something where I just took a drum thing that Matt Halpern played, and then I made a bass track to it, and I did all that in Final Cut, Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of the time people are kind of the set up to record or whatever as part of their practice. I was kind of set up to, I can just plug in and be ready to record to Logic and stuff like that. So then the next step of videoing it, it's not, like you're saying, it's not too big of a deal. One thing that I've actually discovered is that, do you know Photo Booth?
Yes.
That takes the audio from your computer.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the other day I was just so that's generally what I do is I'll, even if I'm playing along to a YouTube video, it'll record whatever your system is set to.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So
it might be because I've got an RME interface that has you can internally route your system audio.
Okay.
So I can have my my DAW output actually go to another input, and and Photo Booth seems to pick that up.
Wow.
Alternatively, you could always just play a track from your phone into your interface, and so that's always worth a shot as well. Is see if your interface will actually see if Photo Booth or whatever your internal webcam thing is, that might capture your audio that's happening.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I haven't really tried that.
It's worth a shot. It might make life. And then I just then I just airdrop that video to my phone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, AirDrop is the best, man.
Yeah.
It's made it so like there's such a streamlined process to all this stuff now that it seems probably a little bit daunting in the beginning, but with practice, I mean, I found, it can keep your workflow pretty easy. I mean, there's other stuff too. Like, I had a gig. I mean, remember gigs? I had a gig like I had a gig last year where I had to, I didn't want to have any paper because I didn't really want anything blowing around. And, I didn't want to necessarily have to read a ton of stuff either. So I wrote like truncated notes on like lead sheet style stuff. And then I used my phone to scan it in, because you can use your phone to scan it in, like with Mac now. It's really cool. And then I just sent it. There's I think the app's called Gigbook. I like sent it to that, and I was able to just put it right in my iPad, and boom, that was it. So, I mean, I don't know, man. There's a lot. It's funny how easy some of that stuff is.
Yeah, there's definitely things out there to help make your life easier.
Yeah.
If you need that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
What's life like in LA just now? It's been a bit tumultuous of recent times.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the one thing that's really difficult is a lot of the stuff that people come out here for is sort of on ice. Like there aren't any real gigs, and all the comedy clubs are shut down for the most part. Like they're trying to operate like restaurants and stuff, but it's not really. I think by and large people are kind of either in two camps. They're super freaked out, or it doesn't exist to them. And I'm in the first. I'm freaked out, but I'm not like gonna like.
You're not prepping.
I got my wits about me. Like I'm not irrationally afraid of stuff that I understand to not be such a big deal. Sure. Luckily by me, a lot of people are wearing masks, and it seems like by and large, that's the most bizarre part of it, because the social protocols of just going and doing a task, like going to the grocery store or whatever, like that is still a weird thing to have to feel any kind of anxiety about what other people's behavior around you is. Because these are things that no one really thinks about, aside from, okay, that person didn't return their shopping cart. Now I can't park in the space because someone was lazy. I mean, now it's a whole other dynamic where the stakes are high in terms of how something like this can get transmitted. So I don't like looking at the world and being angry at people for doing that kind of stuff, but I think that's like a weird thing that has crept into day-to-day stuff. I don't know. Like, I don't know a ton of people who have left yet. Like I hear there's like an exodus of LA, like everyone's leaving New York and LA, but it's not.
Are there any like here at the minute we're on like phase 4 lockdown, so mandatory masks, and we have a 5 kilometer radius that you're allowed to travel in.
Okay.
And when we were in stage 3 for a while, they actually had like police and army roadblocks around the edge of metropolitan Melbourne, checking people coming in and out. Like you had to you need to get like a work permit if you're going to travel to work and stuff like that. And if you didn't have a valid reason, fine you and send you back.
Wow.
So there's no restrictions on movement.
No, there really should be though. I think without trying to get too into the weeds with politics, if we had a different type of leader, or we had any kind of leader, which is, that's how I feel about it. Like, I think we'd have a much different set of circumstances in terms of the numbers you're seeing in the news and stuff like that. I don't think we're at a place where any of the normal stuff even if all that stuff was in place, would be able to come back. But I think, yeah, no, it's a nightmare, man, because you got people who basically don't think it affects them. You know, like there's people who literally don't think that any of this is real.
Wow.
There's somebody on Facebook who, he's a musician. I'm not going to out him and I don't really know this guy personally, but he's adjacent to friends of mine.
I'll put his Facebook link in the description.
But he thinks it's all BS, man. He thinks it's like overblown and stuff. And I don't know. Like I have two friends I have one friend, she's been fighting COVID for like 100+ days and she's not getting better. Like she's not in the hospital, but she's not able to function. Like her
three months. Yeah.
Then I have another friend who had COVID and he's fine, you know? And I think the part about this that's really difficult for people to understand, like Americans generally kind of they feel that they can do whatever they want. There's not really this community-minded thing.
Yeah, you realize how
to the extent that there should be
at times like this.
Yeah, it's disturbing, man. Like that's the part of this that I think is the hardest, is realizing that like it's kind of up to us as individuals, you know, and like people have varying degrees of like freedoms with that. Like I'm lucky that, you know, I have some money saved. I can kind of hunker down for a while. Like I'm not in a bad way financially, but if I was, I have no idea like what.
Yeah, I'm sure you can think back to maybe times in your career where you were living gig to gig, and if a gig got pulled or whatever, that was a big deal.
Yeah,
there's going to be people in that situation right now, and
yeah,
I don't know.
We have some rules in place, like people can't get evicted, and people can definitely there's been like a hold on rent. So rent can't go up because every year generally landlords can raise rent. They generally do. My place is rent controlled, so it's not ever going to be a crazy amount, but they definitely thought about the people in that regard. But no, it's like people, I think...
Is there any welfare in place? Like, you know, you can get a couple $100 a week or something?
They had that for a while, and they haven't renewed it yet. And our Senate basically they basically adjourned until September without any kind of deal in place. So it's pretty terrible, man. Like,
that's a shame.
I think the one thing about America, and I think this is why I think people need to travel. It's like, there's things about America that are great. And I think like there's things about it that definitely are things that great nations are sort of like they advance upon, you know, like there's like a lot of wonderful things. I'm not running for office, so like, but like the thing that sucks though is like there's a lot of weird anti-intellectualism and xenophobia where people don't even really know what it's like to go to some other country and like go to a pharmacy and say, hey, I'm having this issue. Like I was on tour once and I was having some issues in my left arm. And I went to a pharmacy to buy some ibuprofen, and the pharmacist, she talked to me about it for 20 minutes. She was like, hey, and she's like, you don't want to take this a lot because it'll cause bleeding internally, and you want to, you know what I mean? Like she was very, and here it's just like, yeah, you just buy the shit and
buy
leave. So
buy like a crate at, you know, Walmart.
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's a really strange time period for everything.
Yeah.
And, you know, like
imagine how much it would suck without the internet.
Oh my God. Yeah. I wouldn't even know. I mean, so for me, like I live by myself.
Right.
So I've really been in isolation for most of this time.
Any pets or anything?
No. I wish at this point. like I'll see friends on a socially distanced basis, you know, but it's still sort of limited. Like it's outside, and you know, it's not like there's not very much one can do in that situation. Like you can't go to like a movie, you can't go see a band play, you know, you can't play.
And especially like as musicians, so much of our socializing is involving our work, you know, on the gig, at a rehearsal, in the studio. Like that's a lot of the social time that we have as musicians. Yeah. And when that's all taken away, you're like,
yeah, it's pretty crazy, man. Like we're into this period now. Like we're like 6 months in, 5 months in.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm gonna just stop for a second. Can I put my AC on? It might be loud, but let me know if it's too loud.
Go for it.
We've been having like a heat wave, so it's been kind of hot.
I've got the heater on down here. It's actually it's cold today in Melbourne. Right, cold. It's like 9 degrees.
Do you hear this? Is it messing with the audio? Okay.
Now Zoom has pretty good background noise cancellation stuff. It's quite impressive. It actually a lot of time thinks that bass is background noise.
Oh wow, yeah.
It's like story of my life.
Exactly. Yeah, Zoom's screwing us all in the mix, man.
Yeah. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about, because you were in New York for a while.
Yeah.
So, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about time in New York and then why you decided to up stumps, as you say, and go west?
Okay. Well, so I grew up on the East Coast, and I pretty much lived there for most of my life. So I moved to New York in the fall of 2004. And before that, I was living in Boston because I went to Berklee, and then I was hanging out there for a little while, and I was starting to go back and forth because the distance from Boston to New York, it's like a 4-hour bus ride or train ride. So it was an easy thing to do to want to go travel and like hang out there for a couple nights at a time or a night at a time. Like me and some of my friends sometimes would go take the bus to go to the 55 bar and watch Wayne Krantz, you know. So that's how I met I've known Tim for a really long time, and Keith and Wayne. So that's kind of how that whole thing started. Like there's a real natural progression where you start up in Boston and then you go to New York, or some people go to Nashville, some people go to LA. When I moved to New York,
kind of like the graduation of Berklee is getting to New York.
Yeah, I think getting to New York, in my case, I also had some work I was doing at the school. Like I was teaching at some of the summer things. Like they had this thing for bass players called BassLines, which was like a week. No, it was like a 3-day long thing where you're teaching prospective students. That was still when Rich Appleman was the chair of the bass department. So like early 2000s. And then I did that up until a couple years into Steve Bailey's time there. And then I moved out here, so it wasn't really a cost-effective thing to fly from LA to Boston. But for many years, just being close to Boston, living in New York, I would go up to Boston quite a bit, you know, and work up there, or like play gigs or other stuff. So when I moved to New York, I was working with Dave Fiuczynski at that point. Like he had this trio called Keith Express, and I was we made a record called Keith Express. And then I was starting to also do some stuff with Screaming Headless Torsos. So when I moved to New York, I already had sort of a tour, like that was going to happen a few months after I got there. Like I was going to go to Europe with the Torsos, which I did. And then through Fiuczynski, I met Vernon Reid a few months before I moved to New York. And so Vernon's like one of my dear friends now, and like kind of like the first year I moved to New York, like within the first year I did some stuff with Torsos, and then I went to Brazil with Vernon and started touring with him, and I was kind of doing both of those situations for a long time. And then, I was in New York for 13 years, and I'd say like the first third of it, I was doing a lot of that kind of stuff with those guys. And then,
so guitar players like you.
Yeah, I guess that seems to be like the weird thread with a lot of that. Like I've played with, those guys, people like Alex Skolnick, Josh Smith.
Cool.
A very tiny blip on the screen, but there was like an ill-fated tour I did with Tony McAlpine last year, but that whole thing kind of fell through. I don't know. I've done some stuff with Javier Reyes. Like I'm on one of his records. So it's like, yeah, it's all guitar stuff and things like that. But I don't know. I love keyboards too, and I like other instruments, but I think for me, a lot of the music I like fundamentally is like guitar, bass, and drums. Right. So yeah. So I don't know. I guess I felt like I had 3 different time periods in New York. Like the first third was doing a lot of stuff with Fiuczynski and Vernon. Then that sort of tapered off, and I stopped working with Fuse. We're friends and stuff, but that situation eventually came to an end.
Yep.
And then, like there was this period of time, I guess, where it was sort of during another interesting period for America. Like there was the financial crisis. That caused some problems, like with gigs and stuff. Like there was like some weird cancellations, and it wasn't obviously not on the scale that we're in now with COVID, but it was a challenge, man. That was one of the hardest summers I ever had in that city because a lot of stuff dried up and finances weren't as good as they should have been or could have been. So it was a real dark time financially, but I still managed to have a good time during that time period. Like I think back now, like there's some stuff I really enjoyed about being there, even when things weren't the easiest. But yeah, then I guess the last few years I was sort of just freelancing around, I took a pause at one point and got a day gig, like a part-time day gig for a while because I was feeling sort of burnt on music. And I still contend, I was pretty happy doing that, because that was the first time I realized, there's something to being a musician, even if you're a lifer, where you got to protect what drew you into it. And if you start to hate it, you can do all kinds of irreparable damage to your career, And so one reason why I really liked having a day gig is it never allowed me to become bitter about playing, and it gave me the ability to say no to some stuff that I just wasn't feeling like doing.
What was the day gig?
I was working part-time at Apple.
Right.
So it was an interesting gig because when I was working there, this is like 2009, 2011. I was there for like 2 years. And, it's weird, I'd been in magazines and people knew some people, like people that know the kind of music I make, we're not talking about a lot of people, but,
yeah.
They're like, I remember someone came in that recognized me and it was weird, man. Like, but I just was like, look, I'm trying to make a record, and I was working on my second record, and I didn't feel any shame in that position. Actually, one of the coolest stories I have, like right towards the end of my time there, it was like the summer of, I think it was 2011, or maybe it was 2012. I can't remember. I wasn't there for longer than 2.5 years, but Dennis Chambers came in, and he was in there like with because he was still playing with Santana, and I have a lot of friends in common with Dennis, and we're from the same state. Like he's from Maryland, I'm from Maryland, but I've been playing with people like Gene Lake. Mm-hmm. Even around that time, I was working with Gene. There's a drummer from DC named Sean Rickman, and he knows Dennis. And like a lot of mutual friends, like Dennis knew Fiuczynski and Vernon and stuff. And I let him hear like half of the tunes off of Coaxial Flutter because it was like a really hot day, and he was just trying to stay out of the heat and stuff. So we kind of became friends. And he actually tried to get me a record deal from listening to that stuff. Like he like was like, let me try to talk to Mike Varney. And nothing ever happened. Just the fact that he liked it enough to want to do that. And we just connected on social media, and we've messaged back and forth. But I owe him a phone call.
That's
so. And then there was another time, like John McLaughlin was shopping there, and they were having problems with the credit card machines, and I had to vouch for him. I was like, this guy's money is good. You can take his money. And then he emailed me, like I emailed him because I told him, like, you know, I'd been playing with Fuse, and I'm friends with Tony, who's his nephew, Tony Gray.
Right. Okay.
So like he listened to some stuff and wrote me back. So, I mean, it was kind of a weird thing, and he was like really sweet. He said, look, man, I hope the next time I go in there, you're not working and you're on the road. And, you know, that's a weird thing because, like, I think the business is, even at that point, was a little bit different. Like, New York, even around that time period, it's a really tough place to sustain a creative lifestyle. And I think unless you're, like, independently wealthy, you really have to figure out how to make it work. And, like, I always dug having that day gig. So that was sort of like a specific time period for me there. And then, so like the third part of my time in New York was mostly playing and teaching. And I was just doing that. And then, you know, that mixed with like remote sessions and things of that nature. And I guess I sort of knew that I didn't really see a future in New York anymore because I'd moved around a lot. And that gets really exhausting. And I think to live in New York, if you don't own any property, like you're kind of always behind the 8 ball of like rents going up and stuff like that. It can get really, really daunting. So, not that doesn't happen in other cities, but I just felt like I was moving around a lot in New York, and I wanted to change. And
moving sucks. I hate moving.
What's that?
I hate moving.
Yeah, it's the worst. I only moved once in LA, and that was just because when I moved here, I had a place where I was hanging for a couple months, and then I knew that wasn't a permanent situation, and then I've been in my place for a few years. But yeah, it just kind of ran its course, you know. But I didn't leave New York with there weren't any negative feelings. It wasn't like, screw New York, I'm done. It was very much like, I've definitely had moments where when I lived there, I felt that way, where like I didn't love it all the time. But
yeah, do you think the city shaped you as a player? Absolutely.
Oh man, like that's the one thing. I mean, I know that sounds very hyperbolic, and I think like people like to say that because it sounds like a nice part of the narrative, but just so people who don't maybe know my playing or know me, when I moved to New York, I very much was like influenced by like Matt Garrison and like Gary Willis, and I still love those guys. You know, people like O'Teal. And I had a 5-string that I was playing where I had a high C on there.
Yep.
And, you know, like my first record had come out a few months before, like literally a month before I moved, like Mad Science. That's my first record.
So how old were you when you put out Mad Science?
I was 28.
28, okay.
Yeah, I was 28. So at that point, you know, like I was really interested in elements of that kind of bass playing. I mean, I had a really good foundation, and I was always really interested in playing grooves and pocket, but I was also interested in harmony and playing melodies and stuff like that, you know. So at a certain point, that was where my ears were. I think from playing with people who are very unique on their instrument, like Vernon Reid and Fuse are very unique guitar players. I think it started to dawn on me that, like, well, technically Matt Garrison's my neighbor, and if someone wants him to play, they'll call him. Like, I can't do what he does better than what he does, you know? And like, it made me really think about trying to figure out whatever my lane is, you know? And it sort of broke me out of that whole thing of I want to sound like my heroes. You know, like I definitely don't think people have to try that hard to like understand the types of musicians I really looked up to. But I think what I didn't really want to have was like a situation where I play two notes and people think I'm somebody else. Sure. And I think, you know, that's always a thing everybody struggles with, but I think no other place really made that apparent for me other than New York. And really just from kind of hanging out and observing the creative scene, you know, and just realizing that like everybody's trying to do something unique and be true to themselves. And so
the guys that are booking the gigs, are booking you for the gigs, are the guys that are unique and identifiable. Yeah. You know, yeah.
I mean, and that's like I found that to be one part very inspiring and then in a weird way, very freeing, because then it's like, okay, I don't have to worry about not being able to play like so-and-so. Now I can just figure out what I like to do. And, you know, I'll work from that angle. And that's helped me as an adult musician immensely. That's not to say that like I won't hear somebody that I really like and you know, like, I don't know if I get intimidated, but you know, it's like you kind of like, oh wow, that's scary.
Yeah. but, yeah, I mean, just listen to any bass player from Brazil at the minute. It seems like.
Yeah. One time I was on this festival a couple years ago where it was like, I think it was 2013, and that should have been like, I mean, that was a low-key bass hang for the ages, because Stanley Clark was there, Victor Wooten's band was there, and that was when he had like four bass players in that band. So it was like Steve, Anthony Wellington, and that guy Dave Welsh. And then Scott Henderson's trio was there with Travis Carlton. Travis is one of my favorite bass players. And then Will Calhoun had a trio with Charnett Moffett. And that guy's a phenomenally good bass player.
Right.
And then you had all the Brazilian cats. And so there was one night where Pipakina was hanging out at this hotel that we were all staying at, playing like this acoustic bass guitar. And he and I just passed it back and forth. We were trying to pass it back and forth in time. We were playing the chicken. And it was fun, man. And like the music that I was playing, I didn't really play a lot of notes. Like I got like one solo. It was like Vernon's thing. It's not really a thing where I solo a lot, but
like it was like a normal bass gig.
Yeah, normal bass gig, like with one or two spots to do something. But when we were sitting there just going back and forth, I like chopped it up, and he's like, "Oh, okay," like because like he heard that set we did, and it was just all big, you know, big grooves and pocket. But it was funny, man. But you know, it was cool to sit next to him and like just hear him like rip on an acoustic bass guitar. And then there's some other people too that were there that were like, I forget the guy's name, man. He was like one of the real preeminent Brazilian bass players. I'll remember it later. Have
you come across Junior Braguinha?
I met him out here.
Okay.
But at that time I didn't know him. Like
he'd been here a couple of times with Virgil Donati.
Yeah. Yeah. That guy's great, man. There's like no shortage of great players like that, you know? But I think the other challenge with that, and this is not to belittle anything about anyone who plays bass technically or not. I think now we're in the age where everyone plays fast. So that's really not it's not always the most interesting thing, you know? I think there's some people that do it where it's like when Hadrian does it, it's very clear and there's nothing there that's not intended to be there. And that's a very powerful thing. But yeah. I'm saying like generally that's a tool that everybody, like most bass players of a certain ilk have at their disposal. So it comes down to, you know, like your phrasing and whatever your fingerprints are.
Yeah. And, you still have to have information wrapped up in there.
Right. And so what I figured out somehow, really without anyone telling me, but just from like observing the room I was in, was like, wow, I need to really be brave and not worry if I don't sound like what my heroes sound like. I got to figure out what I sound like and, you know, try to think like that. Because I think otherwise, I don't know. It just felt like it was the right time to make that shift. So
it's almost like New York kind of like opened your eyes and your ears, gave some chops, and then when you were ready to kind of develop your own voice, so to speak, LA was a good bed for that?
I think so. I mean, I think there's an element to LA that I still haven't figured out, because I think now that we're in this weird state of like flux, where who knows what kind of industry will exist in a couple of years from now. Like, I won't openly speculate because I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. But I think on one hand, you have people out here that do a lot of work that revolves around making money, which is not bad. Like, you've got people, there's like the pop industrial complex. That's what I call it. No one else calls it that, I don't think. But you've got people that are in that world, and it's a huge thing, man. Like, the entertainment element of that, it's definitely like a powerful world, and some people really want to be a part of that. I found that's not really something I care that much about. Like, know that my path is really the path of I want to play with like pop star X, Y, and Z. And like kind of getting to a place where I could accept that was challenging, because I feel like, isn't that the dream? Like, you get on someone's big tour, but I think because I've been behind the curtain enough, and I know I have friends that have been and left, things like that, the real recurring theme in being a musician, and I wonder if you feel this way too, there's always this element of like, what's next? And then it's not just what's next, but how much power do I have? You know? And I feel like if I was like almost, you know, if I was like 30 years into a career and I didn't have any more power in my line of work than when I started, I think for me that would be a problem. What
do you perceive as being power?
I think power is being able to say no and being able to call your own shots, right? And getting paid to do what it is that you do.
So having your name in lights.
Yeah, or maybe not in lights, but just, you know, I think people that just have carved out a lane that allows them to work, you know? I mean, the thing is like, I don't have a lot of rules personally about what I would or wouldn't play, if it makes sense, because, you know, honestly, I mean, who doesn't love playing? Like, it's the greatest. But I think there's other stuff that comes with it. Like, it's like, okay, how, you know, if it's like a touring thing, how long will I be gone for? What's the bread like? Do I like the people?
Yeah.
There's a difference between liking people, right?
The big triangle, right? The hang, the music, and the money. You need two of these.
But then you have like the idiosyncrasies where it's like, well, I like these people enough to be out for 4 weeks, but maybe not 12 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, so it's, I don't know. It's like a weird, it's a weird thing. But I think by and large, it's like, I think having power in this day and age, maybe not like, let's say prior to March of this year, it's just diversification. Maybe having like a few different things going at once. I think that's really what, because I think the thing that really was interesting about my time in New York was the business really changed a lot. You know, like even just in terms of like the way people consume music. Like when I moved there, you know, I think I had just gotten my first iPod, like within a couple years of, you know what I mean? Like I had just gotten like the click wheel 4th generation. Yeah. Maybe that was the 3rd generation, but it was like, I think it was the 4th, like the click wheel iPod.
I remember I did some cruise ship work, and I came off a cruise ship contract, and everybody was talking about iPods, and I was like, because, you know, back in in those days in the cruise ship, you were pretty much isolated,
Right.
from everything else that was going on. And so I came back home and everyone's talking about iPods. I'm like, that's a stupid name for a thing. What? Next minute.
Yeah, that was such a big thing, man. Like that was a huge thing for me as like someone that put music out too. Like I benefited pretty greatly from the iTunes music store. So like the whole download thing, that was definitely that was like one thing that was an interesting component. There were still record stores when I moved to New York. Like there was still Tower Records.
Mm-hmm.
There was still Virgin Megastore. People still went to the record store, even though we were in this weird age where physical media is starting to struggle a little bit.
Yep.
But, you know, by the time I left, it's like everybody's streaming stuff. Vinyl's kind of on the way back, I guess.
Yeah.
But it just seemed like from a technological standpoint, there were other things at play in that city. Because all of a sudden live music's not the only thing people can do. You know, there's all these other ways people can entertain themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it felt like a lot of the stuff that maybe people were drawn to New York with, like in the 90s, like, and I wasn't there in the 90s, so I'm sort of idealizing it based on what my friends who were there during that time period have told me about. But it just seems like there was, even like with like people going to the bars to meet women or, you know, like whatever, like now these apps like Tinder where you can just like swipe and like that changed a lot probably for like a lot of bars, I would imagine. Like I know that sounds silly, but I know that like in terms of the habits of the kinds of nights people would spend at bars, if that's what they're out to do. Like I talked to a bartender once at this place near where I lived in Harlem, and he was telling me like people that's changed the kind of night that people have, like how long they'll stay in a bar, blah, blah, blah. Because, you know, they feel that in terms of the money they make from tips and what have you. So you just got to like, the hardest thing to do sometimes if you're kind of in one particular corner or niche. And so the music thing is very much like its own kind of community. So no one's really thinking about the bigger picture of what a giant metropolis like New York, like what are people doing with their spare time? How are they entertaining themselves? You know, the one person I always like talking to about this, and I'd always see him real late at night, was JoJo Mayer, because he'd sometimes like he'd hang at people's gigs and stuff, and he'd always have like interesting stuff to say about like where New York's been going and stuff. And
interesting.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. It's like from 2004 to 2016 when I left, it just seems like the way in which we consume media and music, that's changed. So by and large, the effects of that affects everything. Like it's not, you know, like
yeah, the trickle down effect was real.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you notice that where you are? Like were people coming to gigs? Like, or was there a drop off or, you know?
Well, I mean, I'm originally from Glasgow in Scotland, so I've been here for six years, coming up 6 years. So from like 2014. So it's hard for me to really say because the first couple of years you're still trying to get into the scene, find some gigs and stuff like that. But from what I know, like what you were saying, you know, from what I know, speaking to guys who have been here their whole lives, yeah, it's definitely less gigs, more musicians, less money.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of a new paradigm for a lot of people, you know, and I think
yeah,
uncomfortable one. I think we're in a situation now with COVID where everybody's been sort of facing. Not, I wasn't going to say facing the music because that would be too stupid and obvious, but like right. But people are facing like an alternate existence without performance-based income or performance, at least for now. Yeah. And so I would imagine for some people who really that's their arena, it's probably really hard for them.
A lot of the older cats.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not, no fault of their own. It's just like, I mean, why wouldn't you? If you're able to make a great living from playing great music that you love,
Right.
Of course, why would you ever really think about diversifying? Because this is an unimaginable situation, really.
Yeah. No, nobody could prepare for this moment. But I think I like doing production stuff, and I like making tracks. And so there's an element to my existence where I don't mind being a hermit and working on stuff. And then at the end of the day, I've got like some stuff that I worked on. And then, I don't know, but I will say, even as like just a balancing act, I miss playing. Because to me, playing a gig is really where you can get, if not from anybody else, just from the feeling of like, you can validate, okay, is what I'm working on, is this effective? Like, is it working? Am I, is what I'm trying to, yeah, exactly. Is it resonating with people? And that's it's a real magical thing that I think has a healthy balance to the stuff where you're not around people. So,
and I think also like a lot of musicians aren't artists in the idea that they're not creating their own art. Like a lot of, especially sidemen, right? A lot of bass players, drummers, guitar players, keyboards are just we're guns for hire, So then when that's not happening, when nobody needs to hire people, well, you need to start creating your own content. Then people have had to quickly retool or go like, what do I have anything to say? Which is maybe a good thing. Maybe there's going to be some more art from people who weren't doing it before, but who knows?
Yeah, I think it's definitely. I feel really. I can sympathize for people who are in that situation where it's like they're not, like this was an unfair hand that we, and like we're kind of at the lowest, not the lowest part of the food chain, but just because of the nature of how things are, like in the way people watch music live. I mean, I can't think, like I've definitely stayed up at times, like, or I haven't been able to sleep since this started, where I think about, has there ever been a gig I've done that wouldn't be like super dangerous right now? Just in terms of how many people that were there or the size of the room, because a lot of the stuff that I like playing exists in smaller to mid-sized rooms, and you can't really avoid people in those spaces. The last gig I did before lockdown, I was playing with Mark Lettieri and this drummer Sean Wright, and there's already talk of Corona. Like everyone knew it was a thing, and people. This is kind of where people couldn't find hand sanitizer at the stores. There was like phases of it. It was like first you couldn't find hand sanitizers, then people were freaking out about toilet paper. I know. But it was fun, man. Like playing with Mark's a blast. I've done it before, and I played 2 gigs with him. We had a great time. But I remember like after both gigs, in between every time I'd talk to somebody, I'd go wash my hands and like hand sanitize, and like that some shit's about to hit the fan paranoia was about to set in.
Where was the gig?
We played one that was sort of down in Orange County. I forget the name of the venue. Right. But then we played one in downtown LA, and like, dude, there is no stage. We were like surrounded by people. I think I posted, huh?
Is that the Blue Whale?
Not the Blue Whale, but a similar type of setup ultimately, where like we were just in the middle of this room. Everyone was surrounding us. We had to like, there was no way to get around people without passing through them. Yeah. So like imagining that scenario now is like, like it's terrifying.
The sax player Bob Reynolds?
Yes. Not super well, but we've met and we have mutual friends.
He posted a vlog maybe a couple of months ago, because he was on tour in Italy and Europe. Like it was like a tidal wave following him around, and he got sick. The vlog's amazing. Like he was so close. He got sick, really sick, So he's flying back, and he had the mask on and stuff. He didn't have COVID, but he had something pretty similar, like flu-like symptoms and stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, and just that story of like every city they left, it would kind of like get shut down and going on and stuff, and going, oh, maybe this is a serious thing, you know? Yeah.
There are a few people I know that were over there. Like Tim was over there with Krantz.
That's right, yeah.
I think Yannick was with Bob, right? Weren't they kind of out? Yeah. Yeah, it was weird. To be honest, when I went to NAMM, because, you know, NAMM's like 45 minutes from here, like Anaheim's about 45 minutes from LA. Something like that. I don't know. Like, if traffic's good, about 45 minutes.
This is in January? NAMM's January?
January.
Yeah.
People were talking about COVID, man. Like, it was definitely not something that, because there was like some, I mean, this definitely sounded like some campfire ghost story type stuff at the time, but someone was saying, like, be careful in, like, the Hall E because someone got carried out on a stretcher, and it was like, what? You know?
And now it's like, you can totally understand and believe that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird, man. I really think that, you know, I'm not a virologist and I'm not a scientist, but based on like the time frame of everything and considering that NAMM, you have like 10,000 people in that space at any given point, I would imagine, like, it would seem irrational to think that COVID-19 wasn't around at some point.
Especially because it's people from all over the world.
Right. And like LAX is a global hub. Yeah. You know, so it's a lot of weird, you know, it's been a really bizarre, it's been bizarre, man, just the whole thing.
So thinking about your solo career, you know, you released Mad Science when you're 28, and then Coaxial Flutter, which is a killer album.
Thank you.
I love that. What's been your arc or your path or your goals in terms of being an individual artist, and what would you, if you could go back and give yourself some advice, you know, back in the day, what would you say, having learned what you've got now?
Well, you know, it's weird. When I did Mad Science, I don't know that I had a real grand design with it. Like, there wasn't any kind of, but I would definitely say, no exaggeration, I would not have any kind of career if it wasn't for that. Because through Mad Science, you know, I'd written a couple tunes that I wanted guitar on, and I really felt like Dave Fiuczynski was the right guy for it. Because anyone could have played guitar on those tracks, and it would have been cool. Like, I could hear Mike Stern playing on that stuff, and it would probably sound awesome. Or I could hear someone like even like a more blues kind of guitar player with less jazz vocabulary playing on that stuff, and it might be cool. But the thing I liked about Fuse's playing is, like, he's got sort of like this weird, unique take on things. And besides his vocabulary, which is cool, he's got like a real sonic palette. So I just kind of went for broke and asked him if he wanted to play on it, you know, and it's one of those things where he was willing to do it. He wanted to hear what it sounded like, you know, and I had some stuff where I played it with some friends. And so he was down, and it was really just, I was just trying to get him to play on my stuff. He liked my playing, and when he started teaching there, we started to jam, and somehow he started calling me for music. And that really helped me position myself with other people. And it was a good way to go around New York as like a new person there and talk to people like some of those musicians in that circle.
So it gave you a bit of kudos clout.
Yeah, or, you know, it's just at least a way to like make it less awkward to talk to somebody. I mean, I think the thing is, like, no matter what, people are very forgiving. Like, if you just want to say hi and then you talk from there, and like, you don't have to have an angle. Like, you don't have to be like, hey, I play with this person. Like, I found most people I meet, even if I don't know if they're a musician or not, and find out later, oh, that person's amazing. You know, like I've had that experience too, where it's like, you know, like there's a kid. I don't guess he's not a kid, but he's like younger than me. I gave him, you know, I teach him every now and then, and he's in this dope metal band called Moontooth, and they're awesome. Like complicated music. The singer's great.
Cool.
The guitar player and the drummer are great. He sounds great playing the bass lines on that stuff, and it's like this kid's super humble. And so it was like one of those things where it's like you just don't know who you're talking to. But I don't think people have to necessarily sell what their relationship to the music industry is when you just meet somebody on like a gig or something.
Sure.
Or at their gig. But for whatever reason, it gave me some confidence to talk to people and like trying to hustle. But, you know, I don't know. It's weird. It gave me like a good, sort of a good thing to have in the back pocket. But what it also did was it started to get me to think about composition and think about like what can be done with instrumental music. Now, Mad Science is definitely, you can tell I'm sort of trying to make sense of my influences.
Yeah.
And I would argue that like even though its intent wasn't really to be a bass record, it probably comes off like a bass record, but maybe a well-intended bass record where some consideration was made for songs. And like by the time I got around to doing Coaxial Flutter, I was way more confident with who I was as a player. So there's moments on there where I play stuff, but I was more concerned with like the writing than playing. But I think to answer the second part of the question, if I could go back and give myself advice, I think I would have done more to play more shows as a solo artist, and I would have tried to make more records and document stuff more frequently. Because I think I probably had more there that I could have built that I just didn't consider because I think I still really wanted to be a sideman and play with different people. And
you didn't want to be known as the guy that does like the crazy instrumental music because you might not get the call for the straight ahead R&B gig. Yeah,
but I think in retrospect, now I don't think I would mind that so much because I think we're in this world now where a lot of those scenarios don't really come up. Like not to the extent that like things are like life altering, you know, like if like I think I got to like one day I realized, you know, because I have friends that are amazing musicians. Like one of the guys who plays drums on both my records, Adam Deitch. Like Adam's ridiculous. Like he plays great.
One of my favorite bands in the universe.
I've known those guys since we were kids. Like I met them the same time they met each other. And there was actually, not that this matters, but here's a little like side story that only a few people know about. When we were in college together, there was like another thing where it was like myself, Adam Deitch, and Jeff Basker. And so those tunes on Mad Science, like Orange and a couple of the other ones, it's the three of us, like Actual Proof. We do a cover of Actual Proof. And we do another tune. Like we used to, that's when Deitch would play more of his fusion stuff.
Right.
And Jeff's now like a Grammy Award winning producer. But at the time he was a jazz comp major. And we were working out like, you know, we're trying to play like stuff like Herbie tunes and Weather Report. And so while this was all going on, like Lettuce was doing their thing. But my point with Adam is like, he's a really, really great, there's so many things he can do on the drums that are not just what people know him for. And I think like he's definitely made records. Like he has like a quartet record that's got some jazz type stuff on there.
That's like got like pyramids on the cover or something, I think. Yeah. That's cool. And he does the break science stuff. Yep.
But he's got chops, man. And like I don't know that he's ever felt the need to like flex in that way or like make music that reflects the amount of facility he actually has. But if he wanted to, he could. But I think what I like about the way he does it is he's always been very aware of like what he likes to do and what he doesn't mind that people perceive him as having a strong suit being that kind of a drummer.
Sure.
You know, and like, but I think like, you know, for me as a side musician, like sometimes it can be confusing because of people. I think about this a lot because if I put up a weird clip of me doing something that's weird, like I know nobody's going to call me to do that.
Yeah.
But I know that like I could also make a clip of just doing a walking bass line and it would be like the kind of walking bass line everyone would want to hear on their shit. So it's like, but I think ultimately, I think having a lane is more important now than just being part of the status quo. Because I think, especially in this moment that we're in now, like it doesn't matter if you know 500 songs you can play on a wedding gig. That at this point, I mean, it doesn't mean that there's no value in learning that, but I'm saying if someone threw you a raft and like, here's how you survive COVID-19. Let's say like you have like two things, like you have the knowledge of 500 songs, but there's no gigs. Or let's say you have a unique paradigm and a unique perspective and you're doing something interesting.
Yeah.
That's currency now. So,
and especially now because we have a direct connection to the people who will be into that shit, you know?
Right.
Well, this is the phone is your global shop window, you know. Instagram stories, like the way to connect with people, and like what you were saying about documenting what you were doing with your first couple of albums. Like people want to be on that journey with you, and they want to see and know and connect more because they're used to that and so many other things that they're into.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me too, I really like the elements of bass playing where you're just playing with people and trying to make whatever the music is work.
Yep.
So like from a personal goal standpoint, like I care what drummers think. Mm-hmm. Like when we're playing together, like I want it to feel how it's supposed to feel. I want it to sound good. And like I've played with enough drummers that are so different from each other, man, where it's like the first drummer I played with when I moved to LA was James Gadsden. So playing with that dude was like amazing. And like we were just playing kind of old R&B stuff that sounded like records he had played on, which is probably weird for him, but like but like he and I had a nice lock, and we were talking about playing, and he had some cool stories about Jamerson and like just how he had Total Recall and stuff like that. But he was saying, he's like, I could tell you play other music, but you have vocabulary in this, so it feels the way it's supposed to feel. You know, and then I played with like people like Keith Carlock and Thomas Pridgen, and then like I've done stuff with Cindy Blackman, and it's like they're all really different. But as a bass player, like even though I'm saying like I think having an identity and like a creative path is important, I think I do take a lot of pride and pleasure in like being able to play with people and like trying to make the music work. So I say that, but I'm not saying that at the expense of being like a good bass player. But I just think ultimately the path of being like a session person is a little bit harder to find now. And in a weird way, I find that having a thing that people know you for helps you get work. So it's like a weird,
right.
I don't know if I'd call it a catch-22, but it's similar to that.
Maybe because extremes are now less extreme, you know, perhaps.
Right.
You know, so what might have been viewed as that's some pretty far out fusion stuff is like, well, that's actually pretty tame compared to, you know, what we have now or whatever.
Sure. Yeah,
this I don't know if you can see that. This groove.
All right. Yeah.
This funk, True Fire TV, all different kinds of funk. So is funk, you know, a real pillar of your bass playing and your development?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I would say that like, well, okay, so I grew up in the 90s. You know, like I grew up in the 80s, but I came of age in the 90s.
Sure. How old are you just now?
I'm 44.
Okay.
So like I'm Generation X. At that time period, like when I was in high school, you had bands like Living Colour, Fishbone, Primus, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and those were gateway bands for other stuff. Like for me, like with like through the Chili Peppers, like I remember reading that like one of the songs they did was like a meter song. It's like, well, who are the Meters? And then like checking out Parliament Funkadelic and stuff like that. Like that rhythmic thing, that's probably the style that most had an effect on my concept of groove.
Right.
And then, I also liked a lot of progressive rock stuff. Like Rush was a huge deal for me as a young musician, and even as an adult. Like really, like the more that I learned, because I didn't really know anything about their story, so I didn't know that they just were like, we're going to do whatever we want or else. Like it was kind of, I think they're like one of those bands that like a lot of young musicians flock to because they're just playing, but the songs are cool. So it's like no one's really going to like. It's not like, here, let me put on this instrumental shit that's like really hard to understand, but there's cool fills or cool solos. It's like, well, no, this is a song you can hear on the radio, and here it is. A lot of the music I like, though, seemed to have roots in R&B and funk, even if it was filtered through like heavy.
That's a Maryland thing as well.
Oh, I don't know, man. That's a good question.
Scott Andrews says hi, by the way.
Oh, cool. Tell him. Yeah, Scott's cool, man. Like, the one thing about being adjacent to DC, because I grew up not far from DC. Like, there's a style of music there called go-go, which Chuck Brown has been,
Chuck Brown.
Exactly. Like Miles Davis had Ricky Wellman on drums during like the Amandala period, like for live stuff. He was really into that pulse and that type of music. Like you hear Chuck Brown or like the Junkyard Band. The closer you got to DC, like people would drive around with that stuff pouring out of the car, like, and that groove is infectious, man. And it's just like that kind of like that slow. That's like where the quarter note is. Like that whole thing really. Even though like I didn't go to many go-go shows, and if I'm being fair to the times, a white kid from the suburbs probably wouldn't have been the safest thing to do, depending on like, where that show was. Like there was a club called the Ibex, which was like a big place for go-go, and it wasn't safe. Like there was always like potential like violent things that could pop off, but nonetheless, like that music was accessible. So I think that was like a pocket from DC that even if like, I can't say that I listened to a ton of it, but I heard it a lot. And I think it did make me think about like Pocket and stuff like that. But
the Minneapolis, the Prince thing seep in as well a little bit?
Oh yeah. Like Prince was like, when I was a little kid, like third grade, like I got Purple Rain and that album changed my life. And not even in like the exaggerated sense. Like I heard it. It really made me want to study music. There's strings at the end of the song Purple Rain that, that whole part of it just still blows my mind. But yeah, like just, I remember listening to even stuff after Purple Rain because I've always been like a huge Prince fan, but I didn't really become like a mega Prince fan until I could start to like deep dive into bootlegs and like have access to more stuff. Yeah. Because I don't think even as a kid I was aware that he played all the instruments. Like it was more like I thought he had a band. The band was doing all that stuff, and to a certain extent they were. But like, it wasn't until I was at Berklee for this 5-week program when I was in high school that one of the RAs, she was a huge Prince fan, and she was like, "You should listen to this because he's playing the bass and he's playing everything else." And it was like for Let's Work or something. I was like, that's one of the greatest bass lines I've ever heard. So I don't know, man. It's weird. Like the funk thing was always, the funk and R&B thing was always kind of in the background. But I'm one of those kids too that like when I was in 7th grade, like around the time I started playing, I really like metal and I really like hip hop. And for me, like And Justice for All was like one of the biggest records of my youth. I still love that record to death. And when I was like, you know, so it's like,
so if you
there's a lot of things.
Metal and hip hop, Anthrax?
Yeah. Anthrax. Absolutely.
Bring the noise.
Yeah. Also, like, I think that's, I don't know. I always really liked the drums. And I always really liked, I couldn't decide between drums or guitar before I started playing bass. So I think a lot of my influences were bass players that were sort of in the middle of all that.
Right.
So yeah, but like funk is definitely, that's the pulse that informs most of how I would approach playing stuff, even if it's not funk. I hear it very, very gritted out, or like a lay back if I need to, or, yeah, I guess that's it. But I found that, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's certain bands that spring to mind, like Extreme,
right,
or like Pantera. They're not funk bands, but man, they've got a groove.
Oh man, yeah, Pantera, Van Halen, like if you listen to those first 6 records,
Shuffles.
I mean, they were cool with Sammy, but like the stuff, there's like a swagger to those grooves.
Yeah.
That comes from like that whole thing. Yeah, absolutely, man. Like
Guns N' Roses, I would say, like Duff and
yeah, Duff is great. Helmet, there was a kind of a metal band called Helmet. They had some cool rhythms. That led to my fascination and love of Meshuggah. Like I heard Meshuggah in the 90s.
Right.
One of my friends he's like a big metal fan, and he's out here. I remember walking by his room, his dorm, and I heard it was one of the songs. I think it was Future Breed Machine, and like the guitar solo, like Frederick sounded like Holdsworth. So I walked by as that part was happening. Like, what is this shit? Like, who's
the new Holdsworth album?
Yeah. And he's like, it's Meshuggah. And so, they were kind of thrashy at that point. But then the record that came out after that, Chaosphere, that was where the rhythmic thing kind of like, they've gotten like exponentially more into that realm. But Chaosphere kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's really at the helm of what I like to do with music and with bass. Like rhythm has always been at the front and center of it. Even though I like playing melodies, and I would much rather, like, the rhythm is what pulls me in 80% of the time. Did you
ever get into Dillinger Escape Plan?
Yeah. Those guys are crazy, man.
Those guys blew my mind as well. I remember seeing them live, and it was just like a force of nature. Holy.
Yeah. I'm friends with Liam, man. Every now and then we'll like text and stuff. He's really great.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. Maybe we can talk a little bit about teaching, education, how you approach it, what you see maybe as common issues that you need to deal with a lot with students. What you think are some maybe core pillars that people should really always be focusing on. Right.
Well, I think the biggest thing I notice with students is there's a need and a desire to want to learn how to connect everything. So a lot of times it comes down to how does one build a vocabulary? How does one use that vocabulary? And the thing about being a bass player is generally sometimes like you don't have to use very much of it to be effective. Like you could take an idea and offset it by like 1/16th note, and all of a sudden it's a completely different idea that makes the whole thing work differently.
Totally, yeah.
Or, there's like all these little tiny things that you can do with bass. It's not as grandiose as like being like a keyboard player or a guitar player where it involves, like sometimes bass, there's like tiny little changes you can do or little clever things that that can really make something work. But it's always different, you know. It's always like, I think like for me, like a lot of the students that I end up teaching, it's not even about chops or soloing. You know, like I'll occasionally get a student that wants to learn weirdo techniques that I use, and I'm always very, very adamant about saying, look, this stuff is fun, but it's not going to get you gigs. And if that's why you want to work on it, like, don't feel like you have to. If you're just curious and it's something you want to work on, it takes a lot of time to be able to use it. Otherwise, it's just something to do, you know, for fun.
Sure.
But the stuff that I end up working with people on is like how to organize an approach to using their harmony, their sense of harmony, and like maybe their sense of like melody if they want to like get into playing fills, but like how to even organize that. Like how does one decide where to put something? And a lot of what I end up teaching people how to do is like think in terms of like 8-bar phrases, or think in terms of 16 bars, or think about like subtle things that you can play that don't involve changing your part too much, you know? And then, so a lot of times it ends up getting people to identify what they know already and how to like expand on that. So if someone's like, hey, I only know how to use like a G major pentatonic scale. And then it's like, cool, try that over E minor. And then tell, you know what I mean? Like just try to find like little
mind blown.
Right. Just trying to find like tiny things that people can do that's like one little step outside of what they're very comfortable doing. And I think like that's the pace at which really being able to have an approach where you're using vocabulary. I think the way I learned, that's how I learned. Like I would take one or two ideas and figure out what to do with them in a couple different contexts. And then that gave me the confidence to like, okay, I understand what this is. I can use that, or I can, you know, it's at my disposal. So I think a lot of what my approach to education is, it's mostly trying to give people usable things that they can take with them and use in various situations.
But there's obviously going to be some universal tools, right?
Right.
Time, tone, technique.
Yeah.
You know, tertiary harmony, all that kind of stuff.
That stuff, but even more basic than that, like note lengths.
Yeah.
That really is a thing that
listen to Bernard Edwards and you know, try and play those sheet grooves with all long notes.
Right. Yeah, or just knowing like what to do in a situation where you might have to play lots of notes, but some of them are rounder than the others. You know, and like some people rob the very last 16th of beat 4, you know? Like there's like that kind of stuff. So I'm sure like for some people, like they'll come to me and like I'll be like, yeah, you should focus on this, and they're underwhelmed by how simple it is to point that out. But it's like, no, this will really change how you play if you focus on this. So that's what I try to do with people, and I try to get them to think about just things that like I can relate to them that are useful. Like one thing that I like to get people to consider is like practicing stuff at different tempos, but not like slow, medium, ludicrous speed. Like, okay, this feels good at 108. How's it feel at 110? Or how's it feel at 106? Because that's a challenge that, I mean, I don't know if you've had that experience, but I definitely have had that experience where like if something moves by like 2 BPM, it could feel strange, you know, and like can totally not feel comfortable. And it's a weird mind.
Well, I think a lot of the time, like for me, I discover a lot of my rhythmical accuracy is a lot of time connected to my muscle memory, my technique. So stuff that feels good at 120, when you put it down to 190, or when you put it down to 90, it's like that always sounds rushed.
Right.
Whatever. It's like, theoretically, it should be just the same. It should be just as easy, but because a lot of your those muted notes or those ghost notes, or the way you articulate things is wrapped up in your technique. It also affects your timing.
Yeah.
This is a good observation that, running stuff at subtle different speeds and paying attention to how you sound in relation to it.
Right. Like I rake, and like you are a little bit too fast, the whole thing comes apart, Like I don't rake for everything, but for certain things I'll do that. And it's one of those things where it's like really got to be aware of like how fast every little movement is if you're doing economy of movement, economy of motion type things. So yeah, I mean, I definitely, I'm a devil in the details type of player. Like, like I really try to figure stuff out, and I really try to figure out like how to be economical with stuff, or I try to figure out like how much exertion I have to make something jump out a certain way. I'll say for me, like my own personal interests in recording have made me a much better bass player, because I can see, I can listen back to something and hear how clear it is, or like where I might need to emphasize stuff, or if I don't like how it's sitting, I can like figure out where I need to lean back. I don't know. So I think like when I'm teaching, especially if it's people who are trying to work on, like I get people that it comes in this form. I want to work on my groove, or I want to work on my time feel. And so it's like oftentimes trying to diagnose where the improvement might need to occur. I don't like to say problem, because nothing's really a problem. If you lock your keys out of your car, that's a problem. But like if you're just not able to like make something feel a certain way, like that's not a problem. It's just a challenge that hasn't been overcome yet. So I try to think about like what the student is playing, and a lot of times it's like one tiny thing can make the difference. It's like, okay, you're not letting this note ring long enough. This is the note you need to lean into, not the downbeat. Even though the downbeat feels like it's the most important thing, it's really beat 2. That's where the weight of that groove is. So it's like, kind of getting people to think about stuff. But it's weird, because I think I'm a more neurotic musician than some. Like I'll listen to shit and just be really like I wouldn't say that like I've never worked with Donald Fagen, so I couldn't tell you if it was like being in Steely Dan, but I'll listen back to stuff and really pay attention to like, do I sound like I'm rushing there, or does that sound like a breath, and like I have to like call myself out when I'm being too obsessive. But you know how in Logic you can just run takes? Yeah. You can have like a stack. What I tend to do, rather than retake stuff and obsess, I'll let myself do 2 passes. And I can sort of see if it's like just a momentary thing, or if it's like do I need to like work on this so it feels better,
Sure.
I get called sometimes to play crazy shit, man. That's the problem. Like when you put out technical stuff, all of a sudden people want you to play technical stuff, and then it's like.
And so you just got the Logic marker set up like 2 bars at a time. Those 2 bars.
I've done one record like that, and like I didn't feel bad, because I'm pretty sure that's how everyone else recorded that record. But ideally, you don't want it to be like that unless there's a good reason to, like you're changing sounds.
Sure.
And you want to make sure that it's a clean thing, or maybe you have a different, because I've done recordings where I'll use different effects, but they're not used in tandem. So it's like, okay, I want it. Okay. It's just going to have to be done like this.
Yeah.
There's no other logistical way, but it makes the most sense because it's going to sound the best in the end. So
yeah, using the studio tools to their fullest.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple other tricks I'll use too, which I think sound cool. It depends on what it is, Like I'll use flex time. There was a bass line I just played on someone's record where they wanted it to be like a robotic 16th note thing. Like they didn't want it to really percolate like a Jocko bass line or like a power. They wanted it to be like kind of like an arpeggiator. Right. So I could play it and I could come really close to that sound without anything. But I was like, let's put flex time on it and quantize it and see what it sounds like. because it's all 16th and it sounded cool.
Yeah.
So I kept it in there, man, and I didn't feel bad. Like, you know, I could nail it live, but that's an effect that no one can achieve on their own. But it sounded, you know, it still sounded like bass guitar. It still had like the transients that bass guitar can only create because, you know, you're dealing with strings and vibrations and the attack between the different sizes of string. See how obsessive I am? Like that's you can really get it. It can really become a thing where you're deep in the weeds. But
and what basses are you using these days? Well,
okay, I have my signature Brubaker, which is sort of like a jazz bass on steroids, I guess. Like they always call it like some kind of like a altered version of something like on steroids, but it's essentially like a 5-string version of my Geddy Lee jazz bass that I modded. Like my great friend who is no longer with us, Tim Clunan from Callow Hill basses, he modded my Geddy Lee jazz bass. Like he put in, well, originally I had Nordstrands in there, but then I put some Aguilar super singles in there, and then he ended up putting on like better tuners and like a hip shot, and so that's probably my main 4-string bass.
Yep.
And I also have like another jazz bass that's like got 60s spacing. That Geddy Lee's the one in the True Fire video. But then I have another jazz bass that's in that Scott's bass lessons course I've done.
Right.
That bass is killer. God, I love that bass. My friend, it belonged to my friend, and he was living in Brooklyn, and I was living in Brooklyn. And one night we were gonna hang and get dinner. He was like, "Man, I got this jazz bass. Check it out." And I was sitting on his couch playing it. I was like, if you ever want to get rid of this thing, let me know, because this bass has some mojo in it. I don't know why this 2012 Fender American Standard J bass is this killing, but it is. And that was a good year for those. But through some circumstances, I ended up getting that bass. So I've been using that, and that bass is cool. I have a P bass, which is one of those American vintage reissues, but it came out in the 90s. So it's a double vintage bass because it's supposed to be a 60s bass, but I think it came out like in 94. So it's like,
I
don't know if there's a phrase for that, but it's like a double vintage. So that bass is cool, man. I love playing it.
I think the phrase is just good marketing.
Exactly. It's strange. Like I never really fancied myself. It's not that I really thought about not playing one, but the P bass is one of those things. Like it just sort of crept in there, man. Like
happens to everybody.
Yeah, and I really like it when it's the right bass. There's nothing better, you know. But then I also have a Strandberg Bowden, which I helped them with their promo stuff when it was released, and I got to beta test the prototype because Kerry Nordstrand's a buddy of mine. And it was like it was like a couple months before we shot the thing, but he's like, you'd be the right guy to like demo this thing because this is sort of up your alley. He's like, you want to like check it out and decide? I'm like, yeah. So that bass is ridiculous. It's like playable art as far as I'm concerned. Like it's like this chamber thing. Like I don't know if you know about the enduro neck that Strandberg invented, but it's like this ergonomic thing that kind of looks like someone's geometry project, but it's very comfortable to play. And dude, honestly, I can play so much crazy stuff on that bass. It's unreal.
So you have to kind of keep it in the corner under lock and key.
Yeah, like I'll hurt myself if I try to play that stuff on other instruments. Then I have a Lakeland 5502 with Nordstrands. I love that bass, man.
That thing one with the Music Man, the humbucker at the bridge, and the single coil. Yeah.
I really think, man, like if you're doing sessions, that's if you need like a wild card bass that you don't have any 5 strings that sort of have that ability to sound like a Music Man or a J. Like it's really, I love that bass.
Yeah, killer.
And I'm about to do something with Spectre. Like they're going to send me like one of their 5 strings to check out. I always love those basses. You know.
And because you did have some Callow Hill basses?
Yeah, I do. I have an OBS 5, which Tim made for me in, I I got that from him in 2012. That's at my mom's house. When Tim died, which is still kind of a hard thing to fathom, I didn't really know what to do. Like, I don't want to not play it, but when I was moving out here, it's like, I don't know if I should insure this thing or if it's like one of a kind. And it is one of a kind. Like that bass, you know, however many of those he built, that's really the thing. Like I would never really assume the role of like a collector per se, but with that thing, because it's like if something happened to it, I feel really bad.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like
so much wrapped up in it, you know?
In the moment when I was packing to move, I just was like, I'll leave it here for now. But the next time I go east, and I don't know when that's going to be because I've been sort of staying put, I'm going to bring it back.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to make sure it's with me because that bass is phenomenal. It's an amazing sounding instrument and it's meant to be played. It's really, you know, I mean, there's basses now, like Jake Sarek makes amazing basses and he makes a great short scale 5.
Yeah.
Like my buddy Evan, he's got one. I know Kevin Scott's got one. I haven't tried Kevin's, but Evan's I've played a bunch because
I haven't tried Kevin's 5, but I tried his 4.
Yeah.
It's the thing that struck me was like it doesn't feel like a short scale in terms of the tension.
No.
Somehow it still has good string tension and it doesn't feel too dinky, but it just feels fun. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really cool, man. I mean, there's definitely something to be said for like a short scale bass like that, especially if it's got a B string, because there is a way to get it to work. And Tim was the first one to do it, man. Like Tim, like, I mean, there's definitely people who are gonna like probably copy that shit, and I don't know that like Tim foresaw or would have even foreseen that now we're in this short scale. Short scales are kind of cool now.
Short scale renaissance.
Yeah. But I think there's definitely, if you record with one, you can see why it works really well. Like it's not hard to see because the way it works, like it changes where the fundamental is and it fills a track really nice. So yeah, they're cool. And then not to mention like you can do like these impossible stretches that can't do on other instruments if that's your thing. I don't know.
And so you were never drawn to the kind of, you know, the MTD, Federa, Ken Smith kind of side of things?
Well, I had a Ken Smith in the 90s, and for me, it wasn't the sound I was going for. Like, I wanted it to be, but it just didn't really do it for me. I think Ken makes amazing instruments. Brubaker's actually helping him with his production now. And so I had a Kevin Brubaker. I had a Brubaker bass that was more like a modern instrument. I played that for like 8 years.
Okay.
So like the record I made with Fiuczynski called Kiev Express, like that's pretty much the bass I use on there. Right. It was like a single cutaway. So I had my moment with it. I think there was a point when I was really trying to figure out what I was doing on my own. I started playing 4 strings a lot. And I just kind of went back to a passive Fender, and I don't know why I felt like I had to do that, but it felt like a way to sort of reset and like just start from nothing and figure out what I want to do with instruments. Because, I mean, up until that point, I don't think I really understood the relationship between, say, like a preamp on a bass and then like the pickups. And what I learned from like just talking to good builders like Kevin Brubaker, or like for a while Jimmy Coppola was in New York. He moved out here, but he Leva Coppola basses. It starts with having good pickups that sound good when they're passive. Right. And then if you want to put a preamp in there, that enhances the mix.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things I love about the F bass is like, well, that's one of the older ones. So it's got F bass pickups and the F bass preamp in it. And when you have, it's a boost only preamp. So volume, tone, bass, mid, treble. So when you don't have any of the bass, mid, or treble boosted and you switch between active and passive, it sounds exactly the same.
Wow. So it's like zeroed out, like kind of zeroed. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just, there's no volume boost. There's no tonal change. It's exactly the same. So then once you start to dial in those bass, mid, treble frequencies, you're kind of enhancing what's the natural sound of the bass.
Right. I love F basses, man. I think they're such well-made instruments, and like, you know, like I've played a couple that have blown my mind.
Yeah.
Like, and I've only played a couple, so they've all blown my mind. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I like MTD. I went to Mike's shop when I first moved to New York, and I asked. I mean, like, this is no slight because he's an artist, and those things are beautiful.
Yeah.
But I asked him about artist pricing. And he was like, "Yeah, man. Like, here's what it is." I was like, "Do you have starving artist pricing?" Like, you know, it's like,
do you have bass player prices?
Yeah. So I don't know. But yeah, I love his basses too. I think they're fantastic. Roscoe basses are cool.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like I'm not really like a purist like that, but I think for me, one thing that was really eye-opening. One time I was at Aguilar. They have their headquarters in Soho, and they have two places, but the main place at the time was in Soho. And Dave Boonshoft has like I guess it was like a Joe Osborne 5-string. And I remember I was playing it through one of their rigs, and I was like, this is one of the best sounding basses I've ever played. And it really was, and it was passive. And it just, you know, I don't know, man. I think that's where my head's at with a lot of stuff. Like, what does it sound like without any preamp? And then, okay, let's put a preamp in the mix, you know?
Yeah.
So I think, like, I know there's some players that really like, they like the vintage thing. They want it's P-bass only. And I've never really been that kind of player. But I think as someone that's really interested in music, and I'm a fan of the records I love in terms of how they sound, I think there's a case to be made for understanding why those basses work really well, and not feeling slighted if someone asks you to play one, because you know, because I think that's the thing. It's like they're just tools at the end of the day, you know. Exactly. I mean, I think, you know, so that's always been my ethos on instruments. It's like I like the forward-thinking stuff. Like that Strandberg bass I have is multi-scale. I can make a case and say that like there's a reason why those things sound really good. It's not the same scale length as the Dingwalls. Like I think the B string is like 37 from like where you measure it from.
Yep.
The Strandberg is 35. It's like 35 to like 33 and a half, I think. But every note it breathes the right way, and it just sounds so musical. Right. So I don't know, man. Like I'm a fan of. I don't know. Like if there's a way to use that and put that on a track and make it work, like I'm down to try. But I think I do like the simplicity of like the early basses and what they do, and that's certainly informed the way I look at modern instruments. Like because I think really that's how you know that a really modern forward-thinking instrument works, because it's got some kind of direct line to like the past. And I can feel that with the Strandberg, even though if you pick it up, it looks like this beautiful kind of, you know, like modern art piece. It really does. I mean, I'm not saying it's not going to sound like, you're not going to sound like Jamerson on it, but it does. There's very intelligent design there, and it makes sense as to why they designed it that way. And I like what it does. To me, it's a musical sound, so I dig it. Yeah.
Interesting. I reckon we should maybe wrap it up there. It's been a couple of hours. Don't want to take up too much of your time. But if people want to check out what you're doing, what you're up to want to get in touch with some lessons or whatever, where can people contact you and find you and access your art?
First and foremost, Instagram, which is at Steve Jenkins. And then I have a website.
Average bass player.
What?
At averagebassplayer.com.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm really glad I was able to get Instagram with just my name. There's a couple Steve Jenkinses in the world. Yeah. And it hasn't always been an easy road, man. Like
my partner's surname's Jenkins. So I said, I'm interviewing this bass player called Steve Jenkins. And she went, oh, my uncle.
That's cool. Yeah. So then they can go to my website also, stevejenkinsbass.com. And that's sort of set up like it's a hub. So that'll lead people to I don't really have a link to Facebook, man. I'm sort of phasing out Facebook, but okay. I'm on Twitter.
Bandcamp?
I'm on Bandcamp, yeah. SteveJenkins.bandcamp.com.
Not Spotify?
No, I'm on Spotify.
Oh, you are?
Yeah. Those records have been out long enough, so I haven't really felt like it's a bad thing to have them there.
Okay.
I haven't released anything new on Spotify, so I haven't really given it much thought as to like how I would do that, you know. I could see putting a song from a new record on there and just making the full record available someplace else, like just to play hardball. Like I think that would make sense, but like it's kind of like with movies, right? Like you have like direct to video, where like you can watch a movie that's in the theater from home, but like it doesn't show up. You have to pay like full price for that, like $14 or whatever. Yeah. So, like I think that's how I'm going to watch the new Bill and Ted movie when it comes out next week. It'll probably cost like $20. Whereas, you know,
which is what
it eventually makes. What's that?
Which is pretty much what it costs to go to the cinema these days.
Right. Because that's how the film industry is like kind of staying afloat, I guess. Like they're trying to make money where they can, but then, you know, eventually that movie ends up on Netflix or like Hulu or something. And yeah, I'm not a big fan of Spotify. I get it as a consumer, and whatever I would say about it in a rant, everybody's already said. I think, you know, it's a complicated thing because there's stuff that guy said in that interview, like the thing I'm talking about, like how people need to make more music more frequently. Like, I don't think, if we look at it and substitute content for the word music, he's not wrong. But most of the records that we like that really have stood the test of time are not things that necessarily have been made like one every couple of years. Like maybe in the 70s, where it was like a goal of a band to stay on the road. You know, like if you look at like Kiss's early records, I think they put out like 5 records in 3 years. You know, like between like the first album and like Kiss Alive 1. Van Halen, same thing. Like if you look like Van Halen 1 and Van Halen 2, the one, you know, like there was a pace that I think really complemented touring. But like if you look at records, I mean, like let's go the other extreme, like Black Messiah, that took 14 years.
Chinese Democracy?
Right, Chinese Democracy. That's a weird one, man.
Yeah, it is.
Do you like it? Or do you think it's more...
It feels weird. It sounds weird. Sometimes I'm like, this is cool. Like there's some cool stuff, and then it's a strange album.
Yeah, there's some good songs on it, but it's definitely, that's an album where you just don't know. I didn't know what to think about when I listened to it. But I'll say that the other 2 albums like that, like the D'Angelo's Black Messiah, I really liked it. Yeah. I was cool with it not being like Voodoo. Like I felt like it, like there's a couple songs there I don't love, but most of it I really liked. And I felt like this is...
I was actually listening to last week, I think, because I hadn't really checked it out properly. Then I heard a track on local radio and I was like, I should really check out Black Messiah. And listening to it, I was like, do you know what, this makes me... It sounds like, this is probably going to get me a lot of hate mail, but to me it felt like a bunch of Prince B-sides. But that's cool, because I like Prince B-sides, and if I could write a song that was worthy of being a Prince B-side, I'd be very happy. But that was what I got from it. It had this kind of like garage, very Prince vibe.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's not the most controversial take on his music. Like there's people that were far more critical of it, and you know, but I liked it. Like I felt like the only expectation I have is that it would just be like a cool record, and something I would listen to a few times and re-listen to. And since it's been 5-6 years since it came out, like that's still something I listen to. But you know, I really liked the last Tool record. I thought that was great. You know, I don't know, man. Like I know the songs are long. It's definitely one of those things where like I would drive when it first came out, and I would go someplace and I would think about how long it would take me to get there. And it's like, I can listen to 2 songs off this album. And then I'll know it's almost time for me to check my directions on Google Maps. So anyway, so I think, you know, there's a timelessness to albums that are really important that I don't know that like deadlines really make sense, but I think like if people are going to be critical of anything that guy says, maybe it's kind of not realizing that, but everybody's making stuff, even if they're not albums, you know, like everybody's got things they're working on and doing. And to that end, I think he's right. You know,
maybe we should look at Spotify more as a social media platform in terms of putting up demos, putting up little skits and ideas and stuff, as opposed to it being more of a shop window. It could be more of a chance for people to, you know, see the journey. Right.
It's hard because most things that we use are multi-purpose now. You know, like the computer, for example. Like to me, the computer, this might get me some hate mail. That's as important to my existence as a musician as my basses.
I think
I love making
absolutely
stuff. Yeah, you know, like I love making stuff. I like creating, and it's part of it for me.
Yeah.
So like, you know, I recently got a new computer in the last year. Like I got a new 2019 iMac. My iMac of 10 years died, and I was sad about it, man. Like
that's pretty good mileage for technology.
Yeah, I had to swap out the hard drive at one point, and I just put like a solid state drive in there. But I was legit sad when it was done. Like it'll still power up, and I can still grab stuff off it really quickly, but the screen doesn't stay lit. There's something with like, I don't know, it's not worth fixing. It was like time, but I felt feelings, man. I was like, this is sad. Like this is my, you know, this is like the one constant I had in my life besides basses. And, you know, like there was these 3 different girlfriends I had when I had this computer, you know what I mean? Like, but also like the records I made on it and the stuff I played on. So you got
you know, like holiday snaps with you and your iMac and wait for dinner and stuff. I miss you, man.
Yeah. I mean, but if you think about all the stuff that we use, like these are all things that their purpose is not just one thing, you know, like the purpose of Instagram could be a lot of things, you know, the purpose of like the phone even, you know,
like to collect personal data and sell it to people.
Exactly. It's a data collection.
You and
right. Yeah. But you know, like to sort of like look at it from a lighter standpoint, I remember the first time I actually used it as a phone, I was like, man, this thing sounds amazing. Like, you know, like the actual sound of the microphones and the, yeah, I don't know. So I don't really know exactly like what to say about the streaming model and like what people, how they view it. But I know that like part of our jobs really isn't to like assess business, but I don't know if there's like a great way to look at like how to put stuff out and use it and benefit from it. Because it seems like the one thing that was pretty useful, nobody can do right now. Like you could always look and see who's listening to what you're doing and like track where they live. And, you know, I was reading about someone that routed a tour that way. Like they could see who's listening to their stuff. But since that's not going on right now, you know, so yeah, man. But no, I'm not. I'm on Spotify, and then we talk about Instagram, Bandcamp. I'm on Twitter. That's user beware because that's usually where I put all my political stuff. And just, you know, it's not that crazy, but political stuff are like it's usually late at night and I'm stoned and just writing nonsense, just trying material out, you know.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time to do this chat, man. It's been really, really interesting.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, man. Good to talk. Good to finally meet in person. Or sort of in person.
Yeah, well, virtual person. No, it's been cool. So, best of luck riding out this wave of of madness.
Thanks, man.
Keep creating. I look forward to. I'm sure there must be an album coming out soon.
Well, there's an album. I don't know when it's going to come out. I'm like writing right now and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully, you know, everyone will get to travel again and we can do it in person and have one of those jams like on some of the other videos I've seen.
Yep. That would be awesome, man.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me, man.
All right. Take care, Steve. Thanks.
Take care. Have a good
Bye.
one.